Hey guys, welcome to another Amy Gilio art video. I'm Amy and today I have a watercolor and ink bird illustration for you. This time it's of a magpie. I went ahead and did the pencil sketch in advance, so we're going to jump right in with the inking. And all of the supplies I'm using in this video will be listed in the description box below. I have to admit that voiceovers are the hardest part of the video making process for me, and so I'm hoping that I get better at this as we go along. So without further ado, let's talk process. I am using a dip pen that has a nib. It's just a general fine point sketching nib. It's nothing special. I bought a pack of like 5 of them at Michael's for like $11, I want to say. And then I am using Winsor & Newton black Indian ink, which is waterproof, and that's important because I'm going to be watercoloring on top of the ink rather than doing the ink as the last step, and this ink will not reactivate when it's wet. So this bird is a species, I believe, that's found only in Europe. There are magpies in North America, but this particular subspecies is a European magpie, and they have beautiful bars of green and blue metallic stripes on their feathers, which you can't see so well when they're not in flight, but when their wings are spread, it's like blue and white and black, and you can really see the contrast, and I just think it's so pretty. Historically, magpies have been seen as a sign of an ill omen. I think that's just, an old wives' tale. They are in the raven family, but that just means they're really smart. That doesn't mean that they're bringers of bad luck. Next, now that I'm finished with the inking, I'm moving on to my FineTec Pearlescent or Metallic Watercolor Palette. This is a 6-pan set. I think it's one of the smaller sets that they sell. And I'm using it as a first layer to really convey that sheen and metallicness of those really bright and vibrant blue and green feathers. And then I move straight into my regular watercolors, which is St. Petersburg White Nights Watercolor Palette. These are professional quality watercolors in full pans, and you can get them, I think, on Etsy and on Amazon, but it's a really good value for the number of pans that you get. And the black that I'm using is not actually true black, but it's a mix that I made of Payne's Gray and Sepia, and there might be a little bit of ultramarine or violet in there. I cannot remember at this point. But black in watercolor is difficult. I try not to ever use like straight black paint because it's just too dark and too opaque. So rather than doing that, I'm layering washes of gray, and you'll see later on I come back in with an inking pen and really add some darks in there, and those are true black. I also have to admit that the feathers on this bird are not entirely accurate. I just kind of eyeballed them as I went along, and feathers are difficult, especially the wing feathers, so I just kind of approximate them. For the blue in the wings, I am using ultramarine, which is a really vibrant, almost royal blue, which is kind of perfect for this bird. And then you can see I'm adding in some shadows on the tail feathers, trying to create some more dimension and depth through the underbody and into the legs. And now that the upper portion of the bird is dry, I can come back in and layer in more colors. So I'm adding in some more blue to really make that more vibrant, and adding in more darks to the wings. And I'm taking care to leave some of the areas white so that you can really see those white bars on the feathers. And I'm also using 2 brushes. I find that using 2 brushes, it's better when you're using multiple colors and multiple like detailing area sizes, if that makes sense. And that way I don't have to continuously rinse out the same brush and I'm not wasting a ton of paint. So I just hold one in my other hand, and then when I need the bigger brush, I can just swap it out. This is also a really good technique to use when you're blending colors, because you'll have like your brush to apply the watercolor and then a brush to blend with, which is generally clean. Adding some final details in the beak and more darks to the black feathers on the head and shoulders of the bird. And I think that's like my third or fourth layer. So you really have to kind of build up your colors using watercolor. And I do believe that I come back in and apply more pearlescent or metallic paints at that point. And now you can see I've moved on to inking with a Pentel pocket brush. And this brush also has a black waterproof ink, and it's allowing me to get more details and some really dark darks so that the upper body of the bird doesn't look flat, in contrast to the dimension that you can kind of see in the rest of the bird, especially the wing and the tail feathers. I'm also using it to create some really dark shadow lines so that each feather has more definition and stands out more against the others. I'd also like to note that the film for this video has been sped up to 800%. So, I mean, obviously this is nowhere near real time, and it took me probably an hour and a half total, I think, to do this entire illustration from start to finish. Now that the bird is complete, I can move on to the background. Sometimes I do the background first. In this case, I waited to do it until after, and I'm just creating some branches with a really light kind of palette mud brown color, and I'm going to come back and add a lot more layers to this as I go. I just find that it's best to start with a light wash and build from there, and that way if you want to preserve some light areas, you can. Also adding a light green wash to the background. I think that this is a combination of yellow ochre and olive green on the St. Petersburg White Nights palette. I'm not really sure what the equivalent colors would be with a different brand. Now I'm coming back in with some darker shades of green to really help those white feathers on the bird's stomach to really pop. And I have to kind of do this in sections so that the paper doesn't dry out on me. This is not watercolor paper, this is cartridge paper. So this is my Seawhite of Brighton cartridge paper sketchbook, and the cartridge paper surprisingly holds up really well, even though it's not a really heavy paper and it's not meant for like really wet media. It really does handle the watercolor pretty well. That being said, it does dry out quickly because it's not a thick paper, so it kind of forces you to work faster, or you kind of get some unwanted hard edges. So now I've got the shadows on the branch in place, and I'm moving on to the needles or the leaves of this tree. I don't know what kind of tree this is. It's some kind of coniferous tree, but that's really all that I know. And I'm just kind of looking at the reference photo and taking from how the leaf patterns are and then just going with it. These are not exact by any means. I would like to point out that I changed my brush again at this point, and I am using a rigger brush. It's also a watercolor lettering brush, and it's much longer, and it helps you get those long kind of flicking lines which emulate needles pretty well. And I think at this point I realized that it was looking kind of sparse and a little bit too regular and too evenly spaced out. So I went back in and I started adding a lot more leaves kind of in between to fill up spaces. Another thing that I'm doing is I'm laying down a light wash of green and then coming back in right afterwards and dropping in a darker shade of green, so that kind of disperses into the lighter green and makes a really nice gradient. So it's a little bit of a wet and wet technique used in a very small kind of isolated area. I also decided that the tail didn't have enough contrast and didn't have strong enough shadows, so I went back in and enhanced that area, and then I also added some more shadows under the bird because that area would be darkest. So here's the finished piece. I hope that you like it. I hope that you got something out of this video and that me talking you through my process helped you understand better how I'm achieving this kind of illustration. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments area below. I would be more than happy to help you in any way that I can. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe. It's really helpful for me to know if I'm producing content that people are interested in. Also, if you like my artwork and you want to see more, come find me over on Instagram at amygilioart. You can also find me on Facebook under the same handle. Thanks for watching, and I'll check you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.